Welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. I'm Humble, and we're back on the Zero project again today. We're going to be a little scatterbrained because we have a bunch of little projects to finish up before we can get the car started. The hope is that we can get the car started this weekend, but if the parts I'm waiting for don't arrive today, we're not going to be able to do that, but we will be able to make a bunch of progress. So let me show you kind of what we got going on now. The exhaust is back off of the car because I needed to get down into this little area. I grabbed it's a little Odyssey PC680 battery. This is the same battery that I had in the Ultima actually, and I liked it because of its small form factor, and it's more than enough for this car. And I built this little battery tray that it sits on. I just need to finish up and put in a battery hold down strap, but I think I'm happy with the battery location here. The only worry I have is just the proximity of the positive terminal and the actual engine and transmission here, but I think that'll be okay. Moving on from there, there's these handful of battery cables that I need to get sorted, but again, these are Gen 2 parts, and this is a Gen 1 car. Now, on the Gen 1 cars, the battery usually sits up in this area, and my goal was to have this whole area clean, so nothing is there, you know, pardon all my trash and stuff here, but that's why I wanted to move the battery down here. In the Gen 2 cars, the battery lives actually down here underneath the steering rack, and there's a little tray down here. I thought about doing that as well, but I want to keep the cable short. I want to keep the weight towards the center of the car, so I think I'm going to stick with my original decision and put the battery in front of the passenger side footwell. Previously, we were working on the fuel system and getting all of our lines done up. I think I've come up with a good solution. Most of our lines are finished. I have to re-terminate this line, which is our fuel return back to the tank. And I need to swap this 90-degree line out for a 180-degree line. The problem I was having is we needed one return line to go back to the tank, but we needed another return line from our fuel system to come back to the sump tank. And the way I did that is there's this little T-piece. So one side will go back to the tank, and the other side will be the return from our fuel pressure regulator underneath here. And the other bummer is that we only need like an 8-inch piece of hose here, and I ran out of this black braided fabric covered line. And so that's one of the parts that I'm waiting for. Is I had to order a little bit more, and once that comes in, we'll be able to finish this up. The other thing we've got going on here is I have our starter in, and hi Kumo, hi, yes, you are not helping. So the other thing is I put the starter in so I could figure out our battery cables and our power cables, and the stock setup is you have one cable that runs from the starter here to your fuse box here. This is our power feed into the fuse panel. There is another cable that will run from the starter over to our alternator here. And then the last cable runs from the alternator to the battery. So the alternator, the starter, and our power are all linked with the battery. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to put this quick disconnect or power disconnect in, but it's only a 2-pole. And the issue with that is if I flip this off, and the engine is still running, the alternator will still power the ECU and all the electronics in the car, even though the battery is disconnected. So what I need is a 4-pole and not a 2-pole. So I'll be looking at swapping that out. So for the time being, I'm just not going to have a power disconnect, and I'll wire that in later. But that can be a project down the road. Wiring. Since we're talking about power and wiring here, we need to finish up the wiring on the rest of the car. So we need to still terminate our wires for our rear tail lights. We still need to do wiring for our rear fuel pump. We need to complete our dash. I'll get more on that in a moment. Complete our dash wiring, which is fairly easy actually, and I'll cover that with the dash in a second. And then finally, we need to finish up our engine and power wiring that I mentioned before. Most of this harness is ready to go. It's all laid out. It just needs to be connected. There is one little side project in hooking up the oil sensor to the plate down below here, as well as running our oil lines up to the front with a remote oil filter. And finally, our emissions setup for what it is, which is this breather line, which will come off the PCV here. It will go to this canister, which I'm sure some of you saw earlier, which is just an oil catch can and a breather. So it'll come in one side and then come out of the top. And then this will go back into our intake after the butterflies. And I think I have a good idea of how I want to route that. But we also have this 5/8 line here. I just repurposed the stock 90 degree out of our valve cover. And I just zip tied everything to our water hose here. And then that will come up. And I think I'm going to remove, take this off of the engine side and mount it up here so it's hidden under the nose cone and sort of out of the way. And it will be teed in with this line and the line from our PCV and breather into this guy. So these are our nice gauges from Smith's. These are supplied by the GBS factory. I have one more than usual, I think, because I opted for a, I think it was the oil temp gauge was the extra one. I'm trying to remember offhand. It was either oil temp or oil pressure. But anyway, so we have our fuel, water temp, oil pressure, and voltometer, as well as our tach and our speedo. And they come with this nice terminated harness from the factory. So I really do like the way this is set up. You just simply plug it into the back of the gauges, and then you have this one main harness plug. Keeps things nice and simple. This is the oil pressure sensor that we need to do a little bit of work towards. In our oil plate, it's plumbed for like an 1/8 inch NPT. And what we need to do is drill out and retap for this 1/4 inch NPT fitting. So we're going to do that here in a little bit. And then also we need to terminate the end so it matches our harness. For the gauges in the dash, again, we pulled the dash out. And this is sort of the layout I've decided on. I really like the center-mounted tach and speed with the tach closer to the driver because that's going to be the main focus. The two most important gauges, I think, for high-performance engines are oil temperature and oil pressure. So those are right next to the tach. And then you see these dotted lines. What I did was from the driver's position, I tried to outline the inside of the steering wheel and the outside of the steering wheel from the driver's perspective, and then put the last 3 gauges above the cluster, or the center steering console cover, so that I could still see the most important parts of the gauges, so they wouldn't be obstructed by the steering wheel. And so that's our fuel, water, and voltometer. Most important of those 3 being water, and then when the fuel gets low, I'll be able to see the needle down at the bottom. So we'll need to cut those out, shape the holes, then we can drop our gauges in, get those wired up, get them wired into the harness, and drop our dash in for the last time. Finish up our wipers. Yeah, so with the gauges there, lots of little projects to do, and we'll try and tackle these as best we can one by one. All right, so I started with some wiring, some really basic stuff. I'm not sure if you can see this well, but got our tail lights hooked up, and up here in the front, I terminated our headlights, got those hooked up. And I'd started working on some other wiring, like positioning our ECU here. And then I realized that if I positioned the ECU, I wasn't really sure where our wiper motor would live. And so I needed to place that. So basically, long story short, the order operation is get the wiper motor sorted, then get our ECU sorted, and then we can sort of wrap up the rest of the wiring. Wiper motor sits here, and then it's got this, I don't know, funky like spiral wrap cable that feeds through a tube, and it goes through one wiper assembly, the second wiper assembly, and then it's got a bit of tube that sticks out to catch the rest of the slack on this line. And so what we need to do is cut that tube. All right, so we have our wiper assembly in place, you can see. I'm not exactly happy with this tail on the end over here. I think that's still a little long and I need to trim it, but the idea is you have that spiral cable goes through these tubes off the motor assembly here, and then all the way across through. That links everything, so you can see what I mentioned here about the flare kind of holding it in this assembly, and then the slack off the end of this guy comes out of the last bit and then curves downward, and I'm just going to trim that up on the other side so that it doesn't stick out or hang down so far. But you need to have a gradual curve on it like this, otherwise that spiral wrap cable will bind inside of there, and it kind of took me a couple of tries to get that right so it wouldn't bind. But I am happy with how this turned out. I just need to make sure if I should ground this or not, and I think I need to. So I'll need to run this to chassis ground over here. But now that we have our wiper assembly in place, our ECU, which is this emerald unit, we can figure out where that's going to belong now. And it's going to sit kind of in here like this. It's really tight cable-wise, as you can see, getting the harness plug here. But equally difficult is up here on the top side. There is a USB port or a serial port for programming that is difficult at best to get to. So now that this is in place, I can mark out our bolts or whatever to secure it through the bulkhead, and get that finalized. And we're almost ready to do our power on. So there's the next bit, which I sort of jumped in head and did already, and that is our dash layout. So this is our beautiful dash setup, and we're just going to rest this in place for the moment so you get the idea. And kind of what I was going for, I'll put the wheel in place. This is sort of from the driver's perspective, about as close as I can get, just holding the camera loosely. So you see our speedo and tach there in the center with our oil pressure and oil temperature. And then through the steering wheel, voltometer, water, and fuel from right to left. And from this view, nothing's really obstructed by the wheel. And that's what I was really aiming for, is I wanted to be able to see all the gauges easily. So like this area and this area here are obstructed by the rim of the wheel itself once everything's in place. But set up like this, it's easy enough to see as I'm sitting in the car. So with this dash panel, if I pop this guy back off again, so I still need to wire the gauges, which there's a nice simple harness that'll plug into all these guys. And then the last piece of the puzzle that we need before we can start doing an electrical test is this center console plate, which will rest somewhat like that, and it meets up with the bottom side of the dash here. And I need to put the last of our buttons in place. So for like the heated windshield, our hazard lights, fog light, starter button, and all that stuff will go into this lower panel here. And then we'll be all set for our first test of the electrical system. I'm going to get these buttons drawn up because I still haven't done that yet. Get that drilled out and in place, and then get this little harness going for all of our additional buttons and get that set up and ready. So yeah, we're just about done. Like we really are in the home stretch. It's just we're in that last 10% that takes 90% of the build time, or 90% of the build effort, I should say. Just because we're down to the nitty-gritty stuff and finalizing the looks and feel and electrics on the car. For now, I think that's going to do it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.